In this video, we uncover a daylight assassination that stunned West Belfast and exposed a violent chain of retribution stretching across Ireland. On a bright Saturday afternoon in June 2020, two masked gunmen emerged from an alleyway in the St. James area. They had been watching their target since early morning, waiting on bicycles, tracking his movements with quiet patience. At exactly 12:50 p.m, as their mark walked toward his mother's home, the gunmen ditched their bikes and sprinted after him. What happened next wasn't chaos, it was choreography, a planned pursuit, a close-range execution, a killing carried out in full view of residents on an ordinary residential street. 28-year-old Warren Crossan, a father of two with deep connections to the criminal underworld, collapsed on St. Catherine's Road with multiple gunshot wounds. Within minutes, the killers vanished. His murder would reveal a web of cross-border feuds, dissident Republican links, and an escalating tit-for-tat war that began long before that afternoon. And for many, the motive was clear: revenge. Warren Crossan was a product of West Belfast's most turbulent neighbourhoods. Born into a family steeped in paramilitary history, he inherited not only a legacy of violence, but also the connections that would define his adult life. His father, Tommy Crossan, was a senior commander in the Continuity IRA, a dissident Republican faction that refused to recognize the peace process. In 2014, Tommy was shot dead at a fuel depot in Belfast. His murder remains unsolved. By the time Warren reached adulthood, he had carved out a reputation that extended well beyond the confines of Republican militancy. Police and journalists alike described him as a leading figure in organized crime. Though he primarily lived in Crumlin, County Antrim, he maintained deep roots in the Falls Road area of West Belfast, frequently visiting family there. Those visits, routine and predictable, would ultimately prove fatal. Crossan operated in a grey zone where paramilitary tradition intersected with modern criminal enterprise. His world was one of drug importations, cross-border feuds, and violent retribution. At the time of his death, he was on bail for importing £180,000 worth of cocaine, a charge linked to a conspiracy that had already seen one of his associates, Liam Dewar, jailed. Crossan had also skipped bail in the Republic of Ireland, where he faced allegations of burglaries in Donegal. He was a man living on borrowed time, moving between jurisdictions, evading law enforcement while maintaining criminal operations that spanned both sides of the Irish border. But it was his alleged involvement in another murder, one that had sent shockwaves through Dublin's criminal underworld, that may have sealed his fate. To understand why Warren Crossan was killed, one must first understand the death of Robbie Lawlor. Lawlor was a notorious figure in Dublin and Louth gang circles, a man implicated in some of the most brutal violence to emerge from Ireland's ongoing gang feuds. In 2019, he was linked to the dismemberment of Cian Mulready Woods, a 17-year-old whose remains were found scattered across Dublin. The killing shocked the nation and underscored the savagery that had come to define certain criminal networks. On 4th April 2020, Lawlor travelled to Belfast to collect a drug debt. He was in Ardoyne, North Belfast, when masked gunmen ambushed and shot him dead. The murder was swift, professional, and bore all the hallmarks of a planned assassination. In the months that followed, police arrested 3 men in connection with Lawlor's killing: Warren Crossan, Patrick Tier, and Adrian Holland. All 3 were eventually acquitted, but the damage, in certain circles, had already been done. Some reports suggested that Crossan had helped organise the hit and negotiated a £50,000 payoff. Police never confirmed these claims, but the perception lingered. In the world Crossan inhabited, perception could be as dangerous as fact. Lawlor's associates in Dublin and Louth did not forget. Investigators would later explore the possibility that Crossan's murder was a revenge killing, a deliberate act of retribution for Lawlor's death. The theory was compelling, the timing was significant, and the manner of execution suggested a level of planning consistent with organised retaliation. By late June 2020, Warren Crossan was navigating a precarious existence. He was facing serious criminal charges. He had skipped bail in the Republic, and he had been publicly linked, however tenuously, to the murder of a high-profile gangland figure. Yet on the morning of 27th June, he made a decision that placed him in the most vulnerable position imaginable. He travelled to West Belfast to visit his mother. It was a routine trip, the kind he had made countless times before. But routine, in Crossan's world, was a luxury he could no longer afford. Unknown to him, two men had been waiting since early morning. CCTV footage would later reveal their movements in meticulous detail. Around 8 a.m., the two suspects were seen leaving the White Rock estate on bicycles. One rode a purple mountain bike, arriving from Turf Lodge and turning onto White Rock Road at approximately 8:37 a.m. Roughly 40 minutes later, he was seen again, now accompanied by the second suspect. They crossed the Falls Road and made their way towards St. James's Road and Crescent. There, they waited. For hours. Positioned near St. James's Crescent, they monitored the area, watching for their target. It was a patient, disciplined surveillance operation, the kind that requires planning, coordination, and intelligence about the victim's movements. At 12:20 p.m., Warren Crossan arrived at his mother's home on Rodney Parade. He had no reason to believe he was being watched, no reason to suspect that the men on bicycles had been waiting specifically for him. But within half an hour, the trap would close. At 12:50 p.m., as Warren Crossan walked along the street near his mother's home, two masked gunmen appeared on foot. They had abandoned their bicycles and emerged from an alleyway that connected St. James's Road to Rodney Drive. The transition from surveillance to action was seamless. Crossan saw them. He ran. The gunman pursued him from Rodney Parade into St. Catherine's Road, a narrow residential street where neighbours could see everything unfolding in real time. There was no cover, no escape. The gunmen closed the distance, raised their weapons, and fired multiple times at close range. Crossan collapsed. The post-mortem examination would later confirm that he had been struck by up to 5 gunshot wounds. He died almost instantly, his body crumpled on the pavement in broad daylight, in a neighborhood where he had grown up. The gunmen did not linger. They turned and fled back through the same alleyway from which they had emerged. The entire sequence, from appearance to escape, had taken less than a minute. It was efficient, brutal, and executed with the precision of men who had planned every detail. Witnesses emerged from their homes. Emergency services were called. But by the time police arrived, the killers were already gone. All that remained was a crime scene in the heart of West Belfast, and a body that told a story of violence, vengeance, and the unforgiving nature of the world Warren Crossan had inhabited. Detective Chief Inspector Peter Shaw led the investigation into Crossan's murder. Shaw's team conducted door-to-door inquiries, collected CCTV from across West Belfast, and released still images and video footage to the public. They created a major incident public portal, appealing for information from anyone who might have seen the suspects or their bicycles. But in a community historically wary of police cooperation, progress was slow. In December 2020, 6 months after the murder, 2 men, aged approximately 33 and 45, were arrested under the Terrorism Act. Both were questioned extensively and then released, unconditionally. No charges were filed. No further arrests followed. The investigation remains open, but as of late 2025, it is effectively inactive. No suspects have been charged. No group has claimed responsibility. The identity of the gunman remains unknown. The most widely accepted theory is that Warren Crossan was killed in retaliation for the murder of Robbie Lawlor. Several media outlets described his death as a tit-for-tat killing, orchestrated by Dublin-based criminals seeking revenge for Lawlor's assassination in Belfast. The logic was straightforward. Crossan had been publicly linked to the Lawlor hit. Whether or not he was directly involved, he had become a symbol, a target whose death would send a message. But the picture was more complicated. Police also explored alternative motives tied to dissident Republican factions and the cross-border drug trade. Crossan's criminal activities extended far beyond a single murder. His involvement in cocaine importation, his connections to dissident networks, and his father's legacy within the Continuity IRA all suggested multiple potential sources of conflict. There was also the possibility of betrayal. Both Crossan and later his close associate Mark Hall were killed during rare visits to family homes. The timing suggested that someone with intimate knowledge of their movements had provided intelligence to the gunmen. In a world where trust was scarce and alliances were transactional, betrayal was always a viable explanation. Yet no definitive motive has been established. The investigation has not attributed the killing to any specific group or individual. What remains is a patchwork of theories: revenge, rivalry, republicanism, each plausible, none conclusive. 18 months after Crossan's murder, another name linked to his network was added to the list of the dead. Mark Hall, a close friend of Crossan, was shot and killed on December 18, 2021 near Rodney Drive, West Belfast, the same broader area where Crossan had been executed. Hall had his own connections to Belfast's underworld. He had been linked to Davy Murphy, a loyalist UVF quartermaster who allegedly supplied weapons to dissident Republicans through Crossan. In 2018, Hall and Murphy were charged with blackmail and threats to kill after attempting to extort £10,000 from a farmer in County Antrim. Armed police intervened, and both men were arrested. The charges were eventually dropped, and both men were acquitted. But the episode illustrated the complex web of loyalist and Republican criminal cooperation that defined certain corners of Northern Ireland's underworld. Murphy himself was murdered in February 2019 at his farm. Hall survived that wave of violence, but by late 2021, his time had run out. On the afternoon of the 18th of December, shortly after 4:30 p.m, Hall was visiting his mother's home on Rodney Drive. A masked gunman approached the house and fired through the living room window. Hall was struck up to 7 times. His sister, who attempted to intervene, narrowly avoided injury. A bullet passed through her handbag. Hall was rushed to the Royal Victoria Hospital, where he died. At the time of his death, Hall had been living in the Republic of Ireland with his pregnant girlfriend and their young daughter. Like Crossan, he had been targeted during a rare visit to family. Like Crossan, he had been killed in broad daylight, in a residential area, with surgical precision. Police believe the two murders are connected. Investigators have suggested that both killings stem from the same network of criminals and may have been orchestrated by individuals within that network, possibly as acts of revenge, or possibly as the result of internal betrayals. On the 16th of July 2020, less than 3 weeks after Warren Crossan was buried, his grave in Milltown Cemetery was vandalized. The act was widely interpreted as a continuation of the disrespect and violence that had defined his life and death. But the broader impact of Crossan's murder extended far beyond symbolism. His killing and the subsequent murder of Mark Hall marked a dangerous expansion of Republic of Ireland gang violence into Belfast. The cross-border nature of the feuds, the involvement of both Republican and Loyalist networks, and the brutal efficiency of the executions all signalled a shift in the landscape of organised crime in Northern Ireland. For investigators, the case represented a frustrating dead end. Despite extensive CCTV evidence, multiple arrests, and public appeals, no one has been charged. The gunmen remain unidentified. The planners, if they exist as a distinct group, have never been exposed. For the families of Warren Crossan and Mark Hall, the lack of resolution is a wound that remains open. Both men lived violent lives and made choices that placed them in harm's way. But they were also fathers, sons, and brothers. Their deaths, however predictable to those who knew their world, were nonetheless devastating to those who loved them. Nearly 5 years have passed since Crossan was chased down and shot on St. Catherine's Road in West Belfast. The gunman who killed him disappeared into the same alleyway from which they emerged, leaving behind only CCTV footage, forensic evidence, and a community that knew more than it was willing to say. The investigation stalled. The arrests led nowhere. And the motive, while widely speculated upon, remains officially unconfirmed. Was it revenge for Robbie Lawlor's murder? Was it a betrayal from within Crossan's own network? Was it part of a broader power struggle between criminal factions operating across the Irish border? The answer may be some combination of all three, or none at all. What is certain is that Crossan's death was not an isolated incident. It was part of a continuum of violence that stretches back decades and shows no sign of ending. His father was murdered in 2014. He himself was killed in 2020. His close associate, Mark Hall, was executed in 2021. Each killing begets another. Each act of revenge justifies the next. The purple mountain bike, the patient surveillance, the broad daylight execution. All of it speaks to a level of organization and intent that transcends ordinary criminality. This was not a crime of opportunity. It was a planned assassination carried out by men who knew exactly who they were targeting, where they would be, and when they would be vulnerable.